So tonight on the big interview, we've come out of the TV studio, we've come down to a radio studio. We're here at Downtown Radio, and Stuart Robinson, give us some clues as to who we're going to meet tonight.
Yeah, well, listen, a guy who really doesn't need an introduction, Robin, in many ways. This man has chalked up more years on radio than most of us have actually been around, and that's saying something. He's been on the air here at Downtown day in, day out from 1976. A household name, a Hall of Fame winner recently at the PPIs in Dublin, and a man who, you can see the Downtown Country logo behind me, such a big Northern Ireland radio icon that in fact 3 years ago we launched an entire radio station in dedication to this gentleman.
I think we all know who it is. So tonight on the big interview, I'll be talking to Big T, Trevor Campbell. So we're here in Downtown Radio, and Trevor, we're here in the original studio from day one. So this place must have plenty of memories for you.
Gosh, yes. 42 years ago, and the decor's different, the equipment's different, but where you actually sit and the whole operating desk is sort of exactly where it was 42 years ago, you know.
So you've been here 42 years. You're the only presenter who's been from the start, who's still here today. Why do you think you've lasted 42 years?
Oh gosh, that's a funny question. I don't know. It's one of those things. I think particularly the country music, the popularity of it over the years. Maybe it's my own love for the job that I do, because I gradually became typecast with country music.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, we all started with a daily show, those of us who had a daily show. In fact, I had daily show and a Saturday show and Tuesday and Thursday night country shows. We all had a specialist show. And I suggested that I would like to do country, and the country proved to be so very popular, and it maintained its popularity, and I became a bit synonymous with country music.
So where did this love for country music begin then?
I think I loved it, or liked it, before I knew it was country, because back I had an interest in music. My uncle had a record radio shop, and then later television. So we always had music in the house. We always had radiograms, records, and I always seemed to be attracted to it from I was no age. I know by songs that I loved, that I can still remember and think what age I was when they were popular. So I've always had a love for music, and then the country music wasn't sort of segregated, pigeonholed so much then. You had middle of the road sort of songs that turned out to be country.
Yeah.
And then there was a lot of country music played on RTE, Radio Ireland as it was called then, or as we called it, and then Radio Caroline came along, and Don Allen had his own country shows there, and I suppose that's where I found I loved it. I was certainly attracted to it, and that's where the seed was sown, certainly.
You were very young the first time you got behind a microphone. I think it was about the age of 6, wasn't it?
Yeah, somewhere about that, apparently, yeah. That was an uncle of mine, whom I'm named after, middle name Victor, and he used to have a setup at my grandmother's house where he had the old microphone that you see now so often on album sleeves and videos, the big
yes,
chrome one.
Yeah.
It was one of those, and you could talk into it in the parlour, and it came out through the radio in the living room, which was intriguing, if nothing else. So I don't know if it was his idea, or well, it probably was, that I should talk into this, and people would listen. And you must remember this was about 1952, so it was quite a novelty. And I remember sort of making up the news and reading it and stuff. I didn't read it, I made it up, so I researched it as well, so there was a journalist in there too.
Your career started really by doing discos, didn't it?
Yeah, in 1970 I did my first disco. Accidentally, really, again, like so many of these things. I was putting tapes together with an idea that maybe someday I would send them somewhere as an audition tape, which I never actually got round to, but I used to make them. I think I was aiming for perfection that I never really found, because you're using a tape recorder and a record player and another tape recorder, and you're trying to put the thing all together without. The biggest hindrance was the noise a pause button made.
Yeah.
Sort of trying to turn the tape back and not get that and whatever. But no, I was making tapes, and I had never spoken into a microphone publicly. And it was at the boat club, tennis club at Stranmillis one night, and the band didn't turn up, and a friend of mine whose tape recorder I had been using for these mock-up tape things, he came down and asked me would I do a spot. I said, not. I've never spoken. So I didn't. But I got a phone call later in the week from the guy who did the regular disco in the boat club, and he said, your friend tells us you're a disc jockey, and would you do this? And I knew immediately, I sort of broke into a sweat. I knew this was a regret one way or the other, whether I said yes or no. So I thought maybe the yes regret was a better one to handle. So I said yes, I would do it. And I started off the next Wednesday and really loved it. You know, I really enjoyed it.
You got to your first radio gig on a North Sea radio station, didn't you?
North Sea, Radio North Sea of Holland.
And how did that gig come about?
Oh, I had got to know Don Allen. I went to the Isle of Man for holidays, and Don Allen had been on Radio Caroline, as I mentioned earlier, and after the Marine Offences Bill in 1967, Pirate Radio had stopped, and he was on Manx Radio, so I got to know him personally, and he told me he was heading for Radio North Sea as program controller, and would I like to come if when it came.
Yeah.
So so it was his idea, and that was November 1972.
Okay. So you did that for a while. Then you ended up being a civil servant as well, didn't you?
Well, I was a civil servant originally from 1966. Yeah.
So how did the downtown gig happen? How did all that come about?
It was December 75. I got a phone call from Don Anderson, who had just got the job as program controller on what was to become Downtown Radio. He rang me and asked me, could he meet me? And we met on the Strangford Arms, and that was it.
Yeah.
He said, you're on, so that was December 75, and we went on air March 1976.
And what's your memories about the first day? Was everybody extremely nervous?
Yes, everybody was. People that you'd think wouldn't be nervous were nervous,
And of course, back then, it wasn't just one show a day you were doing 2 shows, weren't you?
Well, I was doing 2. I was doing the lunchtime show, and then on Tuesday and Thursdays, country show at night.
Of course, Downtown being the first commercial station here in Northern Ireland kind of catapulted you all to fame, didn't it? I mean, you were out doing gigs all over the place and appearances all over the place as well, weren't you?
Well, it was the first station that really people could listen to for music. Radio Ulster or BBC Northern Ireland opted in and out of national for a bit of music every now and again. Mm-hmm. So suddenly there was a station playing music all day with local traffic news, emphasis on local actual news. In the breakfast show we had news every 20 minutes. And I mean, the Troubles were still very current at that time, so news was of the essence, and a lot of people tuned in particularly for the news. And we had the cream of the crop as far as news team was concerned. We had a lot of experienced journalists, and it certainly did take off very, very popular. It was quite amazing how recognisable we seemed to be right away. And it was really the alternative to Radio 1, because that's all there had been before that. And then people were listening because it was local as well. So it was good that way, you know.
Let's talk about some of the big stars that you've met over the years, some of the world's biggest country music stars, from Johnny Cash to Dolly Parton, Tammy Wynette, Chris Christopherson. George Hamilton IV was also a good friend of yours, wasn't he?
George was a guy that I really got friendly with, more than any. And the funny thing was, I met George at the first Wembley. We went on air, as I've said, in March 1976, and the Wembley Country Music Festival was always at Easter. And in April, I flew over to London to my first Wembley, and I think George Hamilton IV was probably, as he frequently did, compare the show. And I met quite a few at that time. They were fairly easy to meet.
Were the ladies easy, the likes of Tammy Wynette?
You did sometimes get to bump into them, and as long as you were armed with your microphone like a 6-gun, you can get it out and stuff it in their face, which really was because as you know, however you get it, once you start the interview, it's just hello and their name, and they never bother saying you've just stuck that microphone in my face, And to get back to Tammy, I got very friendly with Tammy as well, because again, Tammy was over here quite a lot, and I was comparing most of those shows for Jamaican. So Tammy had no problems really with. As I say, there were very few that I could honestly look back and say that they were a problem. Sometimes maybe difficult to get to, which wasn't their fault. The first time I interviewed Cash, he was very surprised to find out that I had difficulty.
Right.
I casually said, Colin, something like, at last, whatever it was, and he's a very sincere guy to talk to. While you're doing his Ladies and Gentlemen, I Have With Me, and you start mentioning and building it up, he's quite uncomfortable with that. He more or less is going to get into the chat and talks in a very, very down-to-earth way, and as most country singers do, really, because it's a down-to-earth sort of music, really, people music, whatever label you wanna put on it,
So after presenting the country show for so many years on Downtown, it must have been great to finally hear that Downtown Country was coming on the air.
Yes, it had been muted, for many years. Jokingly, sometimes, directors or managing directors and head of sales, whatever, used to say, we could create a country station, and put you on it and make money out of it. But at that time it was only a joke, because there were no licenses. It wasn't as it was to become later on that, there were so many licenses and so many radio stations did jump up, and then suddenly they came up with a country station and decided to call it the name of my show for 39 years, Downtown Country. So it wasn't, there was no question about it. I knew it would be successful, because it's not a lot of people, and a lot of broadcasters saying, country music has become very popular. Country music has always been. As George Hamilton IV used to do some great monologues explaining how country music came from these islands, especially Northern Ireland and Scotland, indeed maybe all of Ireland and mostly Scotland as far as maybe parts of England and so forth, but very much so Ireland and Scotland went across to America in the early Pilgrim Fathers days, and it got sort of countrified and came back. A lot of it was folk music and people playing the music of their particular home area, and they all got mixed in together. Like you got the French and the other country mixing up and getting Cajun music, and the Dutch had an involvement, and a lot of people singing their folk music and music maybe about returning home. So a lot of it possibly sad music for that reason, but definitely people music, and I have certainly found that certainly most of some of the biggest stars in the world that I've interviewed have been so very down to earth. I mean, Farron Young, who had been a big star since the 50s, one of the biggest names in country music. During an interview with him, I mentioned an album. I think I said I hadn't got it, and he said, "Oh, I must send that to you." And I mean, he didn't get the record company to send it. He posted it to me with a handwritten letter, you know. Which was really,
great,
really nice. Yeah.
One of your big career highlights must have been the PPI Radio Awards, getting into that Hall of Fame.
Yeah, that's... well, I didn't realise, you know, I had heard it, and I'd heard of the award, and each year, you know, you hear about so many awards, dinners and things and all that. I didn't realise quite the honour it is in the Radio Authority in Dublin. There is a wall, and they have photographs of all the people who are already on it. So on the day that we're getting the award, which is a lovely award, it's a glass award with your photograph superimposed on it, you know, and I'm just below Gay Byrne.
Wow.
And Gay Byrne's expression, it kind of looks as if, my God, you know, they'll let anybody in this wall now, you know. But further along is Ronan O'Reilly. I didn't know, well, I needn't say I didn't know he was on it, I didn't know anybody on it really, until I started looking at it. And Ronan O'Reilly, the guy who brought pirate radio to these islands, so... it felt pretty good that I was on the same
You're in
wall
good
as
company,
him.
yeah.
Good company indeed, yeah.
Now
Good down-to-earth music company, you know.
Exactly, yeah.
Haven't been frightened by Gay Byrne's look.
Now, we couldn't do this show without mentioning Linda Jane.
Yeah.
Is it difficult to still talk about her?
It's not, because so many people still talk to me, you know, "Oh, thank you very much to you, I've won the tickets, and I've known you for a long time, and you used to always listen to yourself and your wife, Linda Jane." And they sort of rhyme that off just as if it was almost still current.
Yeah.
And what I found over the years was that everybody has a story about Linda. It's never just I knew Linda, I met Linda. She did a lot of charity work. A lot of people would say, "Oh, she did this for our charity," or "She did the other thing," or "She did this for me." And I mean, my partner at the moment, well, the last 10 years at the moment sounds a bit, you know what? In case she's watching this and she's thinking of changing me. No, very lucky to have her for about 10 years. And I mean, she was telling me that her memory of Linda Jane, not only listening to her, was that her blind mother got in touch with Downtown to ask about a certain gospel song that Linda had played when she was doing the Sunday night show. And not only did Linda give the details, but she sent her a cassette copy of it, which was the extra mile that Linda went, that I would sometimes think, you know, do I do that as often as I should, really?
Yeah.
So people always seem to have nice memories and nice stories, which is good. So... No, after the hurt of... it took a long time to say, before Linda died, I always find those words very difficult, because in your head you're saying Linda's dead. I mean, no, that applies to me.
Yeah.
You know, this
Yeah.
this has happened. This is real. Linda's dead. And every time I said it, it hurt again. You know.
Yeah.
So, but it
And the
does.
two of you were more than a showbiz couple. You were so close together all the time, weren't you?
Yeah. Well, people said it wouldn't work. Because a lot of people, I suppose, have suffered the fact that they've worked and lived together. Not only, I mean, we worked in very close quarters in here. There were times we did shows together. Gosh, Linda had something wrong with her wrist at one time, and she had it in plaster. I had to drive the desk for her. She sat across here. It was in the studio, and I was sitting here operating this. That was the biggest strain it ever had, you know.
Yeah.
I say, you're coming up to news, you know, you won't have time to do this. I'm doing it, you know, but you won't have time. This is my program, and while I'm driving. So, yeah, that was a bit like the car and the map situation, you know.
And do you remember your first time meeting her? Did you know she was going to be the one that you'd end up getting married to?
I fancied her when she was on television, you see.
Yeah.
She was news, current affairs on television, and she had lovely eyes, very blue eyes, and I was really taken by her. And we met. There are, well, there used to be several stories. I think there were 6 people claimed to have introduced Big T to Linda Jane, and actually, none of them. The guy who did introduce us, I think, approached us once and said, "I am the guy," and we didn't recognise him, pure and simply because it was a festival week or civic week at Beaver Estate in Belfast, and Linda and I were both judges. I arrived as one of the judges in the talent competition. The hall was packed. And I said to the guy, you know, who are the other judges? And he named a couple of people, and he said Linda Jane from Ulster Television. And I thought, oh my God, you know. And so that was the actual first time we met. Wow. So it was the guy in Beaver who actually introduced us. We went on that night to, it was a cocktail tasting thing in the Stormont Hotel. So the manager of the Stormont, he claimed
right, yes,
that was his claim to fame as well. And Trevor McClintock, who was managing director of Gilby's, who sponsored the gay. So it went on. So we didn't ever bother to correct them anyway. But you know, yeah.
Tell us the Johnny Cash story. You introduced Linda to Johnny Cash, didn't you?
As I say, Johnny was lovely to interview, and I'd interviewed him quite a few times, and I'd spent a couple of hours with him in Nashville. He had just come back from the dentist, and he has a lot of pain in this jaw, and he was explaining to me that it's not really toothache, but it's this pain he has. And he said, when they give me painkillers, that can take me in the wrong direction, you know. And as I said, I'd got, you know, fairly comfortable with him. And it was when he was in the King's Hall in Belfast. And I had finished the interview, and I said, "Do you mind if I introduce you to my wife?" And he said, "No, not at all." And he was, you know, he's dressed in black. The boots and he is a big, bulky man. Johnny's about my height, or maybe a bit taller, and quite bulky. Yeah. And I went and got Linda Jane, and he just took about 2 steps forward and said, "Hello, I'm Johnny Cash." Wow. And he says it just like it's on the record. And Linda just stood there, you know, "What the hell's my name?" You know. And she said of all the people, and she met a lot of big authors and a lot of big stars and actors who were over here, and interviewed them, and she'd be quite comfortable with them. But the Johnny Cash one is very, you know, "Hello, I'm Johnny." It's the way he does say it. It's quite shivery, you know.
So you've been on the radio 42 years. You've kind of lived your life on the radio in front of the Northern Ireland public. The press have always been very interested in your life as well, not always for good reasons.
Yeah.
Do you ever feel sometimes they were a little too intrusive in your personal life?
You got to accept that the one goes with the other, because a lot of what the press write about you when things are good, it creates more work for you, more interest, gets the profile up.
But when things are bad,
so
that's what makes the front page.
When things are bad, you got to accept that they are. The only thing is, there have been times when things were written that are absolute rubbish.
Yeah.
You wouldn't think that would happen to someone, because we're still in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland people will only let you get to a certain height of popularity, because they'll be very quick, quite rightly, to remind you, you're only on the radio here, big lad, Equally so, they'll say, like it's great, love to. I mean, I have a guy who rings me from Spain, lorry driver. Well, he rings me from Germany, but the first night he rang me was from Spain, in Spain. And he said, you keep me company right across the miles. And he said, I've never written or phoned a radio station. But he said, I just felt tonight I had to just give you a ring and tell you how much you mean to me. And, this is a big trucker guy who obviously is putting those miles up, and he's lived a fair life and all that. Yeah. And he takes the trouble to say that, and that sort of thing, even after 42 years, I go home and tell Vi that, it's because it flatters you, or it makes you feel you're doing something nice, and but to get back to the press thing, you do have to, the unfortunate thing is, you don't have the power to reply, when you read these bits that aren't true. You feel you can tell your friends, and then you find out the people that you're telling already know it's not true. It's the other masses.
Is there one story that really upset you? It's been printed about you.
Not that I can really recall. There've been a few things. The exaggeration always, or the assumption that gives a good story, that being in the business, you immediately recognise why it was done. And you want to shout from the rooftops, wonder would they give me a couple of minutes on television to deny this and explain it. But thankfully, it's all water under the bridge.
Like myself, let's say our drinking habits have been well documented in the press over the years as well.
Yeah, I was going to say whiskey under the bridge now instead of water, actually.
Is there any whiskey these days?
No, 16 years.
Yeah.
I think 16 years. They always say if you can't remember your last drink, you haven't had it yet. I don't think that's true. I think it's 16 years.
When did you realise that the drinking was getting out of control?
You realise it when it gets mentioned to you quietly by friends. You don't realise it immediately because you don't want to realise it at that time. You just sort of say, well, they don't understand, or... Then you're looking back, I mean, they are the ones who exactly understood and knew where you were going. But if it was that easy that you recognised it the first time somebody told you were drinking too much, the addictiveness wouldn't really come into it,
And the first step, taking something to do about it, is the most difficult step, isn't it?
The realisation, the recognition, and the admitting of it. I think you can actually take the first step without really admitting it. It's when you admit it that it's starting to work for you, and that's when you're doing something about it.
So, Trevor, what's next for you? I mean, do you think you'll ever retire from radio? I
don't honestly think so, because I still feel that days without radio, I don't mean that I don't enjoy my 2 days at the weekend, but other days without radio are a bit incomplete for me. I still look forward to my show. I still get what I would call a healthy nervousness at the beginning of a show. No, I don't really feel that I would ever say that's it. I don't know, maybe you change, but after 42 and a half years, I can't see that I'm going to say this is becoming boring. Unless I become boring, that might be.
Well, Trevor, you have entertained us for over 42 years. Let's hope you're not going to retire anytime soon. Thank you so much for doing this interview and being so open and honest with us. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure, Robin. Thank you.